Full recap of the Hornets 76ers game last night. We get 3.5 quarters of the core, the starters out there on the floor. And then Brandon Miller gets injured. We'll talk about all that today on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your podcast, and that does include YouTube. This episode is brought to you by the college football playoffs. We're big time now. The college football playoff, it's here, and you don't want to miss a moment of the action. The college football playoff presented by Allstate begins with 4 first-round games, December 20th and December 21st on ESPN, ABC, TNT, and Max. Your favorite podcast also has a newsletter introducing the Locked On Hornets daily newsletter, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage, delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free right now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Hornets newsletter. The guy writing it, there he is. That's Doug Branson. You can find him on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. You can also text him. The subtext information is on his Substack. He also hosts Locked On NBA. I'm Walker Mayo. Listen to me, WFNZ, every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. on Sports Radio 92.7 FM. I'm glad we're sponsored by the college football playoff because we are not going to be in the NBA playoffs, Doug. And there's another loss that happened for the Hornets last night. They've been losing quite a bit outside of that win against the Pacers a couple of games ago. You thought maybe they would have a pretty good shot against Philly last night. No Joel Embiid. You also you do have Paul George, you do have Tyrese Maxey, but you did not have Joel Embiid, and you didn't have Jared McCain, who has been a rookie that's just been tearing it up. We know firsthand from a previous meeting with this squad, but ultimately Philadelphia, really the last 6 minutes of this game, they really pull away and put this one away. Philly wins 121-108. Doug, the story coming into the game was they looked a lot closer to the fully healthy version that we were hoping for at the beginning of the season than they've ever looked. Mark Williams, LaMelo Ball, Miles Bridges, Brandon Miller, all out on the court at the same time, and Josh Green. So you had your starting 5. We still want Trey Mann. He is still hurt. We get some pretty decent news from Trey Mann we can get to later. He did not play in this game, but it's as close to as fully healthy as the Hornets have been in like 3 years. And then in the, later in the game, Brandon Miller would suffer an injury and he'd go out. I want to focus on the return, though, of those guys, because I think there's something interesting here looking at the chemistry. They just haven't spent a lot of time on the court together, but they clearly all like each other. I think that's a close-knit group. What'd you think about the starters being out there, how they played with one another, missing all that time? What were your thoughts there, Doug?
So, yeah, it's the healthiest they've been on paper, but they are paper healthy right now. They are not healthy as a team in terms of their ability to execute whatever game plan they wanted to execute at the beginning of this season. They had, when everyone was healthy before the Mark Williams injury preseason, they had this idea of like, all right, we're gonna get to X, Y, and Z, and through the first 10 games we'll figure that out. Well, all of that sort of fell to the ground with all of these injuries. And now I think what you saw last night, like there's a micro story last night, which is like Paul George and Tyrese Maxey, they just put on a show without Embiid. And I sort of predicted that this was going to happen on the preview that I did yesterday. I just felt like Paul George has been in a little bit of a slump. They've been trying to get the whole big 3. He's taken a little bit of a backseat to Maxey and Embiid. And so I just felt like Paul George was going to come out flames, and he did. And the Hornets defense, I don't feel like in the first half really responded to that. I just felt like there were plenty of opportunities for George and Maxey, early offense, similar to what we saw in Chicago. And the Hornets defense just isn't there right now. And that's not good because I don't think the offense is capable of scoring 120 points. And so if you're going to give up 120 points, you are going to lose virtually every basketball game you play. So that's the micro story. But the macro story Walker, is I think what we saw last night resembled to me, at least on the Hornets side, like a preseason game. Like everybody's kind of trying to figure it out. The rotations are really messy. Mark Williams plays for 3 quarters, doesn't play the 4th quarter. Still a minutes restriction on him. I'm not sure if there's a minutes restriction on Nick Richards or if Charles Lee has just lost a little bit of trust in him. That's certainly the case for Vasa Micic, whose minutes wax and wane. And so, like, there's no continuity. There's no rhythm. There's no rhyme. You're getting some excitement. You're getting back-to-back alley-oops between LaMelo Ball and Miles Bridges, but that's muscle memory. That's institutional memory between those two. And you've got a little bit of that with Mark Williams in the alley-oops and him just being tall, available guy. But it's a mess out there right now.
So I'm glad you brought up Mark Williams because I think you're right. It is difficult for, I think especially LaMelo and Brandon playing alongside Miles, your top 3 scoring options. Mark in there, pick and roll with LaMelo. He runs a ton of those possessions compared to everybody else in the NBA. Where does Miles fit in all of it? And I actually thought Miles had a pretty nice game. I thought he finished at the rack. There were some really strong moves for Miles. So, he was probably, maybe even the player of the game for the Hornets if you look at what he did. Really like 24 points. Didn't shoot the 3 ball well, but I like the downhill game that Miles brought last night. I thought that was really useful for a team that certainly is offensively challenged. But I think you're right with the chemistry. The Mark Williams stuff, though, I think, that excites me because with LaMelo running more pick and roll possessions per game than any other ball handler in the NBA, he's almost at 12 pick and roll possessions per game, which is 0.7 above Cade Cunningham. Like, that's a decent percentage. It's a decent amount above the next guy up there. You bring Mark to the equation, and you saw that quite a bit. Mark just hanging out at the top of the key. Vasa Micic and Nick Richards run this all the time. Micic loves that game. But like LaMelo and Mark, you saw some finds. What was it, the 3rd bucket of the game? Or maybe it was the 2nd because the Hornets went on that 8-0 run after Philly went on the 7-0 run. So you find Mark, and there's the lob on like this kind of dribble handoff. It was almost broken because Mark kind of jumbled the ball to LaMelo, but finds Mark for the lob. I think LaMelo driving downhill too. Like, there's times where the defense pays more attention to LaMelo, and then he finds Mark for the easy dunk. I think you saw the ease of the game on some of these possessions come back with Mark Williams being out there offensively. But to your point, man, the healthy on paper point that you make, Mark still looks slow. Mark still doesn't look like he's full speed ahead with what we're used to seeing. I think the weight is going to be interesting to watch with Mark. Like, how much of this, some of it has to be conditioning. Some of it has to be that he hasn't been out there on the floor and he's still on a minutes restriction for a reason. Like, he just hasn't played a lot of basketball in so long. I do wonder, because he put on weight so he could bang down low, how much does that hurt his versatility at the top? Which I'm going to be pissed. I'm going to be pissed if that takes away some of his mobility. I get you got to bang down low, but I love the versatility of a 7'1" guy. All that to say, I thought you did see some good stuff between Melo and Mark last night.
So you have to feel for Mark, though, because I think he did put on weight, expecting that he was going to round out into game shape very early in the season, and then all of that would kind of fall into place. It's kind of like me, like right now, I'm putting on a ton of weight, eating a lot of cookies and a lot of treats but I'm expecting New Year's resolutions to come around. Well take care of it all. But that's not a guarantee. I could, trip and fall down the stairs. I could bust an ankle. And then all of a sudden, all my well-made plans are out the window. So, basically what I'm saying is Mark Williams and I are basically the same in terms of athlete.
Are you seeing that too, Doug? Are you seeing kind of the same stuff that I'm seeing with him?
Yes. Yeah. He's a little slow on the uptake. Vasa, Dale Curry said last night that it was good that LaMelo, one of the silver linings of LaMelo being out is that it allowed Vasa to get into shape. And I was like, what shape?
I heard that,
There are a lot of shapes, Dale. There's squares, triangles, very round circles. There are a lot of shapes, Dale. What shape is he in? Because he can't stay in front of anyone. Like, defensively, he's not in shape. He's knocking down a few more of his shots and turning the ball over a little bit less than he did at the beginning of the season. But he just absolutely cannot stay in front of anyone.
Yeah, there's still some bad ones.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, the Hornets right now, they look like a team that needs another couple of weeks. And so this game to me is devastating just apart from the Brandon Miller injury, it's devastating if you thought this team was going to sort of pull something together and make a little bit of a surprise postseason run. I think what you have to, this game to me says, hey, we need to reformat our idea of what the goals are for this season, probably closer align them with what the franchise felt like all along, which is that this was an evaluation season. This was a try to get everyone healthy at some point and see what works and what doesn't. And unfortunately, because of the Brandon Miller injury, they might not be close to that.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about. Let's do it. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Bees everywhere!
I think of the Hornets as really an algebraic equation. What you do on one side, you have to do to the other. Everything has to balance. So if you get guys back, somebody does have to be sacrificed. Last night, Brandon Miller was sacrificed at the helm of the NBA gods, the Hornets gods. I don't know what happened. I don't know what the Hornets did in a past lifetime to have all this bad juju, but it took place again. Brandon Miller goes out with an ankle injury. We'll get to that, plus plenty more stuff on Locked On Hornets.
I was told there would be no math.
This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. More Locked On Hornets ahead. If I wasn't doing a read there, I was going to try to look up the difference between an algebraic equation and expression, because I don't know if I misused the word there, but whatever it is where you have to balance it out and you have to do something on one side if you do something to the other, that's what I meant for the Hornets. Anyways, all the math nerds now can stop typing in the YouTube comment section.
Yes.
Brandon Miller's injury last night. So we saw Brandon go out of the game earlier. I forget the timing of all of it, but
I think it was beginning of the fourth quarter. It looked like he stepped on someone's foot or tripped over something near the Hornets bench.
Yep.
And then middle of the fourth quarter is when he was driving to the rim. He got some contact from Paul George, stepped on Yabusele's foot, and then that was
the bad one. That was the bad one. Yep. So Brandon would limp off of the court. He was walking on his own power to the locker room, from what I saw in the broadcast pointed that out. But Hornets PR, they would tweet out pretty quickly, Brandon Miller left in the fourth quarter of tonight's game versus Philly with a left ankle sprain. He will not return. Now, after the game, I was watching post-game with Shannon Spake and Terrence Oglesby, and Terrence was saying, this is not going to be a serious injury. He'll be back soon from this. I don't know if that's like a quick, hey, this isn't bad, if there's like some behind the scenes workings going around with that, or if Terrence is just taking the liberty to say what he saw. I don't know.
He's a sicko. He's just trying to keep the hope alive.
What I will say is an ankle sprain isn't good. I would love it if Brandon wasn't out too long, but he is going to be out, you would think, at least a little bit of time. Your thoughts on Brandon Miller's injury, what it means, what you saw last night, just all of it.
I'm an ankle sprain expert now. I mean, if there was just a doctor of ankle sprains, I think they could go ahead and give me my honorary degree, because I've experienced covering so many of them with this Hornets team. And yet still, the biggest thing that I've learned is that you just never know with these ankle sprains. Are they mild? Where is it? Is it high? Is it low? Mm-hmm. And all of these different variables are going to impact the ability for that player to get back out on the floor. And then also that different guys recover differently. I mean, we've seen Brandon Miller bounce back very quickly from injuries that I think would have kept guys out for a couple of weeks. Miles Bridges came back way earlier than his projections. So I just think there's a you never know factor. I certainly hope the fact that he did walk off on his own power, that does factor into it, and that he's only out a couple of games, because again, it's less about like, oh, the Hornets desperately need him in order to, get to some kind of vision that means the postseason. It's really all about, we just want to see what a Brandon Miller, LaMelo Ball combo does. And I will say that I think one of the things that I've learned from this season is that LaMelo and Brandon sort of need each other in a lot of ways and to execute well, because defenses aren't really afraid of Miles Bridges, Cody Martin, Josh Green. And so when they attack one, it allows the other to do some good things. And I think their games actually pair well, really well together. And so, like with LaMelo being out these 6 games, I think Brandon suffered. And I don't know if the same thing's going to happen to LaMelo, but I wouldn't be surprised if Brandon Miller misses 6 games, if things become much more difficult for LaMelo to get to the rim effectively, to kick out. I think he's always going to have his deep 3 available to him, but if he's forced to go to that over and over again, I don't know that that's like super healthy for the Hornets offense.
Well, I mean, of course, gravity, right? Just anybody that can shoot out there on the floor, it's going to help with LaMelo. It's going to help with Brandon, especially with Brandon not being someone you trust a ton, having the basketball and dribbling in the paint because sometimes he loses it. LaMelo, he can get to the rim with some craftiness. He's not explosive. Excuse me. I'll pay the fine later.
That's
but
fine.
We see LaMelo.
By the way, I did find the Phlegm bucket. It's right here.
Okay,
The Phlegm
thank you.
bucket hat.
The Phlegm bucket hat.
I put an IOU for you in there.
Did you have a fine yesterday going solo? And did you call yourself out for it, or were you pretty clean the whole show?
During an ad read, but hopefully no one was listening. I mean, hopefully everyone was listening.
Yeah, I was about to say, hey, what are you doing? Don't mess with the money. We need more bucket hats. We need to buy more bucket hats, baby. So the gravity for these shooters, that's what matters. Yeah, you need, I think you realize the importance, Doug, of like, it's one thing to say, okay, at least you can have some chemistry develop between LaMelo and Mark, and Miles is out there. So at least you have 3 of the 4 of your offensive options. That matters. But it really does matter having everyone out there, because everyone affects one another, right? It does. When Brandon Miller isn't out there, I don't know if I do view it as, well, at least 3 other players are currently healthy enough to play. You do need all 4. That's the product. That's what you want to see. You want to see Brandon and LaMelo play off one another. You want to see LaMelo run the pick and roll with Mark. You want to see Miles cutting. You want to see Miles like catch the ball with, on the move and get to the rack. I would like to see some like fun experimental Miles Bridges setting the screen for LaMelo and seeing what kind of role you have with him just being a beast and getting down low. Like some pick and pop between Brandon and LaMelo. Like I would love to see all these variations. Maybe LaMelo off ball. Like we saw that. What was it? Isaiah Wong was dribbling the ball up a couple times down the floor. Like and Charles Lee goes with 11 different guys in the first quarter because he's trying to find some just a weird season, man. Again,
well, I don't think
like,
I don't know that
normal.
I don't know that he was really trying to find something more than you're dealing with LaMelo Ball minutes restriction, Mark Williams minutes restriction. Miles don't want to push him too hard off the bone bruise knee injury, so he only gets 28 minutes in this game, and so. Yeah, and then you're not super confident in it. Like this game really fell apart in the third quarter when there was no LaMelo Ball on the floor. Brandon Miller was the featured player with some bench guys that none of which you really trusted that much to take a shot. And so that's when things got hot and heavy for the 76ers and Maxey started to really attack. So yeah, I mean there are really no. If Brandon Miller's out for a significant amount of time, like there aren't many answers, and I don't really know what to say to Hornets fans at this point in terms of, what's the deal with the luck or whatever. It's just, it's a soul for a soul, and I think hopefully this teaches this new ownership group that you need depth at every position. That's a lesson, by the way, that's not exclusive to the Hornets. NBA teams across the spectrum are learning that you're only as good as like your 10th or 11th guy. If your 10th or 11th guy is not a solid role player who you trust to shoot the basketball in any kind of situation, then you're not really a playoff team. Then you're not really you're certainly not a playoff contender. You might not even be a playoff team. So, invest in every part of this roster and quickly evaluate who, in terms of the role players that you have now, quickly evaluate who you can trust and who you can't.
You want to move on, answer some Sicko Satchel questions, give rapid fire observations on the other side?
The ones we can. I mean, I think a few of them are on the Hornets getting 100% healthy. So I don't know. I don't know if we can, of course, answer those, but we'll answer the ones that we can.
Yeah. All right. That's the tease. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Bees everywhere.
Have some more stats for you. Have an interesting pick and roll stat as well. Plus, we'll get to some
I've got one too.
questions. All right, let's do it. Interesting stats next. This episode is brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth, and these generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply for product-specific disclosures. Visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Plus, this episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Well, I could definitely use Rocket Money because I've got some subscriptions that I didn't even realize when I was searching the other day. I was like, wait, I'm still paying for that? Goodness gracious. I had a few subscriptions I didn't even know that I was still paying for. Rocket Money would be great to use. It would make it so easy to track all of them down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. So you can cancel your unwanted subscriptions, reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Stats, Locked On Hornets, next. All right, I'm going to go first. Let's do pick and roll stuff because I think that's what I wanted to see, just like with the different types of players that were coming back. With LaMelo being the big guy, right? The fact that he was healthy enough to play in this game, and he is such a frequent pick and roll, ball handler. You see him doing it at more possessions per game than anybody. Would you fair to venture a guess on the highest frequency as a pick and roll ball handler in the entire NBA, who that player might be?
It's not Steph Curry. They're not running any pick and roll in Golden State. I will say
it's a Hornet. There's a hint for you. It's a Charlotte Hornet. And 3, 2, 1.
Seth Curry,
Vasamicic. Vasamicic. No, Vasamicic. Which
because he's not a threat to punish anyone on the dribble by himself.
Oh no, this is the thing, right? and I tweeted this out. Vasamicic and Nick Richards. Like, if you're going to play Vasa, you got to play Nick. And sometimes vice versa, Nick can play more with LaMelo, and we saw that last night. But even Nick Richards said it after a game where, like, you got to figure out the different styles of different players. With LaMelo, it might be a little different than Vasa, but Vasamicic is running running pick and roll possession at over 54% of the time that he's the ball handler. So, I mean, it's crazy, right? Like that leads the league, that leads everybody in the association. But it makes sense because he kind of needs that. But also, that's his game that we saw with Nikola Jokic in the Olympics. And I actually thought Micic was pretty good once he found himself in the paint, and he's a pretty good paint toucher. So when you got in the paint, you were finding Nick Richards a couple of different times. There was like 3 or 4 assists between Micic and Richards. And then Eric Collins got excited on one of the dimes. He said, "Oh man, I love Micic playing with the bigs." Like, yes, I do too. Like that's the kind of stuff that you can exploit when he's in the game. you would like for him to score more than 0 points, but even still, just kind of interesting with this Charles Lee system. Like, that's how Micic wants to play. You run that over and over again. And with LaMelo, like having Mark out there, who knows? I just think it'll be interesting to see once everybody's healthy, you start to pin down Micic minutes. Like, how much is he going to play with LaMelo back, with Trey Mann hopefully on the mend? Like, who knows? It'll be interesting to watch as we move on.
Look, if the Hornets are playing a lot in pick and roll, they're in trouble because as a half-court offensive team, they're not very good. You know why? Because they don't have enough shooters. They don't have enough passers. They don't have enough players that can punish you in ISO opportunities, which doesn't have to do with pick and roll. But it's just if they're in the half-court a lot for a game, they're not going to score a lot of points. I mean, this team really has to get out and run and get early opportunities and let LaMelo play jazz out there in transition. And the one, I think the most effective, if it's going for him, the most effective pick and roll play or handoff play is to Brandon Miller, quick three. I mean, that's been one of their, I think, weapons that they've had in the half court other than the, Vasa-Nick relationship there. But this team right now does not have the personnel such that you would be like, oh, cool, they're running more pick and roll. That's great. It's not great.
Oh, no, for LaMelo, like, I know there was some decision-making stuff with him that he was questioned. Like, LaMelo, I'm fine with. I think there's some fun stuff you can do there. Like, Vasa is probably more out of necessity. In fact, it's definitely more out of necessity. So you're not wrong about that at all. It's just an interesting thing. Like, okay, so LaMelo leads in pick-and-roll possessions per game. Vasa Micic has the highest frequency among players. Like, it's just, we're screening, baby. If one of those guys has the ball, we're screening and we're seeing what can happen with one of them.
Well, LaMelo has two problems in the pick and roll. One, if he's the ball handler, he's not finishing well at the rim. And the second problem is if he's a passer, the guy he's passing to is Cody Martin or Josh Green, who are super streaky shooters. So that's, these are fun. What I'm saying is these are like fundamental issues that the Hornets have. Even if they were fully healthy, we were talking at the beginning of the season about like they don't have enough shooting on this team to really, like, Vegas is probably right about the over-under win totals because this team doesn't have enough shooting. All right, you ready for my stat?
Yep, let's do it.
So since winning back-to-back games against Detroit and Indiana, and this happened in early November 6th and 8th, I believe, they beat Detroit, then they beat Indiana. Their only winning streak of the season, 2-game winning streak. Since then, the Hornets have gone 3-14, with 2 of those victories coming against Detroit and Indiana.
Yeah, of course, with Detroit.
The other one coming against Milwaukee.
Well, look, I mean, Doug, we talked about this last week, how this next 10-game stretch that they had, it was going to go a long way in terms of how you define this season. And Philadelphia, we kind of baked in that they might be experiencing some injuries, right? This was before McCain goes down. This is before we knew for sure that Joel Embiid was going to miss one of these games. And sure enough, we were right to just guess and throw out there, maybe Philly is injured. So you have 2 key guys, not your 3, not 2 of your core 3, but Jared McCain has been excellent this year. So this was a real opportunity, especially with Tyrese Maxey coming in cold. And Paul George being out of the loop. You kind of mentioned him playing second fiddle to Tyrese, but it's not because Maxey was shooting all that well. They went crazy last night. They were just playing well. Paul George hit tough shots. Tyrese Maxey, they both got to their spots, and Maxey was running around like a guy with his hair on fire, like he usually plays. And so 40 and 30 between those two. That's going to be tough to stop. I'd like to force the ball out of their hand and try to make somebody else beat you, but they were hell bent on it being those two getting to their spots, and they hit tough shots. So a little bit of the tip of the cap, but then you had some real bad, sloppy basketball from the Hornets. Like it looked real bad here, Doug, in the last 6 minutes of this game, where they were turning it over. They just were disorganized all throughout, it looked like.
Yeah, and you were praising Miles Bridges, and I concurred that he had an overall good game, and he was critical of himself for the fourth quarter performance where he turned the ball over trying to get it to Moussa Diabate. I mean, they had the lead, or the deficit down to 4 points, and you had everybody got a case of the yips at the end of that game. Like you had Isaiah Wong all of a sudden afraid to shoot it, and that led to a turnover. And then
he was Bob Cousying it. Like he gets to the paint.
Yeah.
And then he dribbles around, then he goes right back outside. Like it was it reminded me of Bob Cousy in the finals, dribbling out the basketball.
It was bizarre. And then he would go on after that to hit a three. So like the guy can shoot, and the guy's like full. I wonder if
fun player.
Yeah, these guys that are just hot shooters in the G League, and they've got a full green light, and then they come to the NBA and they're to a new team. I mean, he wasn't even in the Hornets system, so he didn't play with any of these guys in the preseason. And you're like new kid on the block, and it's like I don't want to like make too many waves or whatever. And there's a little bit of like hiccup when you get to those crunch time situations. And, you know, there's probably maybe a little bit of a natural inclination to want to defer to someone else when it was like, no, you're open, just shoot it. And hopefully his teammates are telling him the same thing, like, Isaiah, if you're open, shoot it. If you're not, pass it. And then Cody Martin second-guessed a pass, and that resulted in another turnover. And all the while, LaMelo Ball was not on the floor because, again, minutes restriction. Want to answer one Satchel question before we get out?
Sure, let's do it.
So let's do this one because I did promise to answer as many of these as reasonable. And so this is a little dated because of what happened to Brandon Miller, but I want to answer it anyway. And this comes, let's see if I've got a name on this. I don't. So 574 asks, hypothetical, the Hornets get 100% healthy this week and maintain pretty much 100% health until the end of the season. Again, this was asked before the Brandon Miller injury. Is it blow up massive retool time if they still miss the play-in? If they do, would adding one really good rookie in the draft really make the team perennial playoff contenders? Is, quote, sustained success, unquote, even feasible for a smaller market in today's NBA?
Yeah, so I guess this is how that plays out, and try to be quick with this. You're 100% healthy. You roll the rest of the way where let's just call 100% health having your core four out there, right? Where you have LaMelo, Brandon, Mark Williams, Miles Bridges. If you have your core four, let's say Brandon Miller comes back next week to just alter the question a little bit, and you have him the rest of the way, that means you'll have a pretty decent sample size. No, we shouldn't be looking, we shouldn't measure this based on how, if they make the playoffs or not, because they've dug themselves in a pretty nice hole already with all the injuries, so I'm not going to measure this based on if they make the playoffs. We do have to measure how it looks, and more so like wins and losses, and then we can even use the splits. Like when all these guys were healthy and conditioned well enough, now we can measure it. And if it doesn't look all that great, then you have some real decisions to make. But if it looks promising in the second half, like Doug, we see these teams make decisions based off of what they did the last 40 games of seasons all the time. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good or bad thing, but we do see teams make decisions based off of that. And if they look good in the second half, then yeah, man, I think there probably is some momentum that you can carry in. Now that you're adding another high-profile rookie, it's going to be a high draft pick. So blow it up seems dramatic. I know we've done this quite a long time now, but the caveat to the question is they would be healthy in this scenario. I just think, man, we're going to get to 2024 or 2025, Doug, before we even have any hopes of these guys being healthy enough to have your core four out there for a meaningful amount of time. So, yeah, I don't think we measure this based off of play-in or playoff appearance. I think we measure this based on how it looks in the last 40 games of the season. I think that's going to tell us a lot.
I wouldn't even categorize it if they missed the play-in. I wouldn't even categorize it as a blow-up or a massive retool because I don't see this organization as totally committed to anyone outside of LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller.
Yeah.
And to me, massive, like blow it up, massive retool, to me signifies like we bought in on an idea and now we're going to get rid of it. I don't think they're bought into anything. I think this is total like top down, except for Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball. Let's take a look at this situation. So that means evaluating like can Miles Bridges elevate his game anymore, or is what we're seeing now essentially what you get? What is that worth on the market if you wanted to make a move and go a different way? Because you're not really making any kind of retool, I think, with him on the roster, just like financial realities being what they are. And then, what's Grant Williams' recovery look like? How can you move Cody Martin? I mean, there's going to be so many questions. And then, because they're going to bet on LaMelo Ball's future. They're going to bet on Brandon Miller's future. But anything outside of that, if they get the number one overall pick and Cooper Flagg is the real deal, and you can speak to this more than I can. You're watching ACC basketball a little bit more than me. But if he's the real deal, then you make that pick. But anything outside of that, I think it's fair game to start to say, all right, What can they do? Can they, get two super good role players out of the assets that they have, or get one all-star level player out of that? Then those are the kind of questions I think the franchise has to ask if they want to accelerate getting to the playoffs as quickly as possible.
They're going to be a fun team for national media to point to if they finish out the last half of the season strong and say they're one step away from finally getting to the playoffs. So what do you do with your first round pick? They're going to be a popular team talking about it in terms of trading the pick. Zion Williamson, you know Zion, who's been linked to the Hornets. He's going to be talked about for Charlotte a lot more. The other good thing about this draft, real quickly, is it's real deep, man. It's not just Cooper. This is one that is considered a very deep class. So top 5, top 7 pick, you're going to have a useful one.
And to the final question, is sustained success even feasible for smaller market in today's NBA? I mean, yes, absolutely. These past few years, whether you look at Milwaukee, Denver, you could throw, depending on what your definition of success, Indiana's been in the conversation for a few seasons now. Sacramento, kind of an example of a team that went really, and Atlanta too, a team that went really high. But Atlanta even made some savvy moves to get themselves, they're firmly in the Eastern Conference conversation again. So it's absolutely possible. It helps when you have a superstar, and I don't think we can qualify Brandon Miller or LaMelo Ball that yet. But if they land Cooper Flagg or maybe that's a possibility to add that, because that is the common denominator in a lot of these teams that do have sustained success. Is you've got a guy like Giannis or Nikola Jokic. That was a second round pick, but guys like that can propel your team forward. And San Antonio is going to be doing that with Wemby.
And I do think LaMelo could be a superstar out there on the floor like now. I think he was playing like one. I get that there are deficiencies to his game, but he'd be one of these, again, like I've talked about it a million times, bottom third of an all-NBA type player where they're certainly offensive centric, but the offense is just so special that like you get to one of these spots where you're averaging 30 points per game and then you get help. That'll probably take away some of his points. But again, fully healthy, above 25 points per game, you're averaging close to 10 assists. That would be a number pretty damn reachable that you could, talk about him being a superstar. But just health and yeah, it's happening again, Doug. It's happening again. Hopefully Brandon Miller can come back soon. But we are closer. Trey Mann, got some good news with him. Hopefully coming back soon too. So we'll see if those guys can get back on the court here again sooner rather than later. That'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your pod. That includes YouTube. Check out everyhornetsboxscore.com. You can also find the subtext information there. I'm Walker Mail. Listen to me WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with you tomorrow.